Good morning and good evening to everyone. It is 5:30 in the morning here in Japan. And the presentation I'm going to deliver today, I've just titled Adventure Under Sail. So I'll proceed. Let's see here. Yep. So A Life Before the Wind is actually what it's called. 3 stories for the Dinghy Cruising Association. So tonight's program, I've divided up into 3 chapters, and I apologize up front. This is a rather image-rich presentation, but I've given you a couple of breaks that work like this. The program is presented in 3 chapters with a 5-minute break between chapters 1 and 2, with the Q&A to follow chapter 3. But please feel free to send in questions to Roger during the presentation. He'll sort of go through those and present those to me, and I can answer as we go along. So it's really a great honor to speak to the choir, a very interesting and diverse group of knowledgeable sailors. I know a little bit, and I always look forward to learning from others. So I look forward to your questions. Okay. So this is Welcome to Adventure Under Sail, and I'm going to go through a number of photographs. If I move too quickly, somebody raise their hand and tell me to slow down. But this is one of the boats that I sail. This is a dedicated sailing canoe, sort of a throwback to the late 1800s that I built. And I sleep aboard this and cook meals aboard it and generally have a grand time. My small boat fixation started who knows where. No one else in my family really sails. I have a younger brother who sails a little bit, but we didn't grow up with boats. I actually spent much of my childhood living up in the Rocky Mountains. So I say in my defense, as a child, perhaps I was left unsupervised and the moon was full. Don't know where the small boat thing came from, but it's always been small boats. I've also had this feeling within myself since I was a small child that I want to know the unknown world, and small boats are my choice for getting there. So please bear with me as I sing to the choir. I will admit freely here that I have a boat problem. Maybe some of you have the same problem. I don't know. But it works a little bit like this. And as you'll see, I have quite a laundry list of small boats, and I consider a small boat anything under 20 feet. And I have a stable full. So I'd like to start off with a short caveat. And I'm really honored and humbled to be here. I think it's a little bit cheeky that I'm going to be presenting about my life. I don't normally do that, but it seems like it might be of some value to someone listening. So I'm hardly unique. My whole thing is curiosity, and I think the small boat, as much of as many of you do, feel you can really see the nooks and crannies of the world that larger boats simply can't access. And I find that sailing a small boat offers me that opportunity to see the most amazing things, from wildlife to geological features, etc. I also believe in living a rather vigorous life. I'm very involved in my daily life and doing. I never really stand by. And I live by this strange little saying: to some people in this life, I believe they watch it happen, others make it happen. And sadly, far too many humans end up wondering what the heck happened. And I sail like I live, by making it happen, good or bad. I'm willing to take the lumps when they come. I'm not a masochist, but sometimes some people say, well, why in the world would you sail in such cold and windy places? I simply find them interesting. And herein lies a lesson that I think will run as a thread through my program. And it's a lesson for any small boat sailor. And again, I apologize if I sound like I'm preaching to the choir, but perhaps there are some new sailors in the group. And here it is. I believe in sailing your boat and never letting a boat sail you. And I'm going to explain this a little bit further as we go through. Make it happen by preparation, by being smart, by kinetic movements. And small boats allow us to use our body, and I'm going to address that very effectively. And by command actions in trying times Otherwise, you may wonder what the heck happened. And you'll see in a moment, I'll get into that a little bit, but I truly believe that when people let a boat sail them, they're really at the beginning of the cusp of trouble. So to start off, I'm going to try to give you an audio clip here. Well, I did a trip from Patagonia into Tierra del Fuego and out into the Southern Ocean aboard a small boat in 2017. And I had a satellite phone with me because, not that I wanted to talk to people on the phone necessarily, but I was calling into elementary school classrooms across the US and engaging with kids. And they were making little dioramas. They were following my trip through MapShare. And this is one of the phone calls I made, and I hope you can hear it. Roger, please let me know if you can't hear this.
Yeah, I'm beating up. This is the first time I'm able to look west and see the open ocean. I can see the Pacific. Today has been beat to weather. I'm off of landfall rocky coastline. There's no protection anywhere, and I'm hoping that nothing comes out of the west. This is a west wind. When I get around the corner up here, they'll start to crack off and start to take advantage of the west wind. So this is one of the big milestones of my trip. Maybe by tomorrow I'll be headed north-south. It's very cold today as well. It's really cold. And right now I'm calling you. I'm about a mile don't know the name of it. A big large island, or no, it's a peninsula. And headed toward Peninsula Brecknock. I'm going to cut in through some islands here, make my call to the two elementary groups, the elementary school in Hood River and the homeschool group in Michigan. And then if the wind holds after those calls, I'm going to cross uncharted territory. There are places on the chart that are just blank, which is kind of cool. I guess nobody's gone in there and done depth. There's some long fjords that are just white. And I'm going to be sailing into those and looking for some sort of protection for the night. That's going to be interesting because it may be a long day.
So that little snippet was one of many memories I had from that trip, and that turned out to be quite a long day. That particular trip had unique challenges that I'll address a little bit later in the program, but for now, I'm going to just give you a glimpse of what drives me as a small boat sailor. As I mentioned, I love to sail and explore the world by small boat, and each time I do this, I tend to do it solo. I learn something about myself each time, and I think that's very, very important. I sail as simply as I can. I don't like complexity. I don't use engines, except for one boat that I sail. Two boats, actually. But I sail engineless not because I'm a purist, but I just don't like the sound of an engine, and I don't like what it dumps into the water. I respect those people who live where I sail, and I try to interact with them. And I move with care in as low impact a manner as possible. And this translates right down to my feet. When I get out of a boat, I'm very cognizant of the coral I'm breaking or the marine growth that I'm walking through. I'm very, very careful about the riparian, zone along the waterfront, very much so. I believe small boat sailing is also a very unique and important form of person-to-person international diplomacy. It's something that governments don't seem to be able to pull off very well, but small boats attract people. That's it. Small boat sailors, I've found, are perhaps more approachable than those stepping off a large yacht. Small boats speak of relatable dreams and tend to open hearts. I'm constantly approached by people just like you are, I'm sure, that they're curious, like, you're kidding me, you came in that thing? And it opens up a world of conversation, and it allows us to transfer information back and forth between cultures. So I like to meet and live with the people of the places I sail. I don't like to drop in and be a foreigner, be a stranger. I like to hear their stories. I traveled twice in Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego with my friend John Wilsford, who you'll hear a little bit more about. And I aside from the sailing and the work and the travel that he and I did together, there's no question that the most valuable part of that experience was not the adventures I had under sail or that he and I had. We had some serious adventures, but it was the people we met who took us into their homes and took us into their hearts on New Year's Eve and other times. That was the real meat and potatoes of that 2-year experience we had together. I have an insatiable curiosity. That's basically why I do this, what I do. I'm very interested in the untouched far reaches of the world. I like everything from Pacific Islands where I've lived, but I'm totally fascinated by cold, windswept, forbidding places, such as the far south and the far north. And I have a desire to share. Pound for pound, I feel that small boats deliver, just like you do. What no large boat can deliver. We're right at the interface of the sky and the sea, and I think that's magic to me. And I found that building boats and using small boats, moving them on land, launching them, sailing them is no doubt a fountain of youth as I get older. So very quickly, I'm presenting to you from my home in Japan. I'll just give you a quick snippet of where I am. Here's a map of, if you look at the 2 green or the 5 green little pieces there, I live in Amatown. And the map on the right, there's a pen sticking there. You can see where I'm sitting right now. And I'm in the upstairs of a boat shop facility that I helped develop. I came here and developed a boat building program. And here it is. This is the name of the organization. I won't bore you with how to pronounce it, but this is a quick video of where I'm sitting at this moment. I'm in the upstairs of this building, and I'm looking out the front window at the ocean, and here it is. And this is when the building.
This is the new Amacho boat shop. And in the front window is the mini boat under construction. New tools.
So that facility has, in 1 year, has transformed into a genuine boat shop. I've had the opportunity to have students and a full-time apprentice. Built this strip canoe out of Sitka for a man from Chiba, Japan. I built several canoes in the shop, and every day I look out the front windows at the ocean. This is a great facility, and it's dedicated to the boat shop and to serving the people of Ama, the town I live in on the island of Nakanoshima, and the people of Japan and international travelers. 2 of my dear friends, John Welsford and another friend will be coming here, Lloyd Houghton, this coming August, and I welcome everyone to come and visit. So currently I also have 2 scamps under build, one for my friend Colin Bethel from Enoshima area in Japan, and another for a man from Chiba. Here is the man from Chiba, Akira Yukatani, who is moved to Ama from Chiba, which is near Tokyo, and he's a full-time student, and he's learning how to build this boat. This is one of the boats we built as a public class. It's the simple 6-hour canoe. And here's a sort of a menagerie of photographs of things that I've been involved in. One of the very interesting projects I'm on an ongoing basis I'm involved in is the rebuilding of Japanese Kanko, which is powered by a Yulo, or as the Japanese call it, a row. And these are amazing boats. This particular boat in the upper left-hand corner is the first restoration that I did, and it turned out very well. People have used these for years to travel far offshore. I've met many older men who use these as young men. They're no longer used. They're sitting in old boathouses. And so the one in the upper left-hand corner is at least 50 years. It hasn't been on the water in 50 years. And now it's a teaching tool, and students use it. We're starting a racing series of Kanko around the island. They're very, very unique boats, and it's been a real pleasure to be involved in this. They're work boats, and some of these have been rowed as far as Korea from where I am. And if you looked at that map of Japan, Korea is not just around the corner. That's serious open water activity. So I have a number of interns who work with me. I won't play this clip, but here are some of them in the Conco. And the Conco that I restored, the first one, is now being used to introduce young people to the sea. And the first Conco that I rebuilt was recently painted as an elementary school project. We allow the kids to do whatever they wanted to do. And this is a linking of kids on an island, a remote island, with the sea. And many of them actually are not that closely related to the sea, but our organization strives to do that. Another project that I'm currently involved in is the building of a mini boat. This is a solar powered GPS mini boat. And high school students worked on this for a semester, and we're about to launch it. And it will be trackable by anyone in the world through a Garmin MapShare tracking with pings every 10 minutes. And you can see where this boat goes. This is the first mini boat in Japan. A few mini boats have crossed the Atlantic. Some have partially crossed the Pacific. One showed up in Norway, I think in September, after 17 months at sea. This boat is about 4.5 feet long. It's quite an interesting project. And here are the students who worked on that project in front of the boat base. We call it the boat base. I'm also involved with Gig Harbor Boat Works. This is a new relationship. And if you look at the boats here, those of you who are not in the United States, I've known Dave Robertson and Falk and Katie for some time. And you can see a Scamp and some other classic designs here. And Gig Harbor Boat Works we've now entered into a relationship where I'm going to be a sailing skills specialist, training some of their employees and customers in the use and safe use of their boats. And I'm going to be doing capsize testing and refinement of many of their models. This is a great company that produces interesting boats, and I'm pretty excited about this new development. John Welsford and I were invited to Gig Harbor when they were building the plug for the fiberglass Scamp, and they were very open-minded and listened to our recommendations on how they could make that boat better. So getting into the program, what we do, what I do at least, is hardly new. This is a craft from Tierra del Fuego. This is a Yaghan open canoe with a fire in it. And the Yaghan, the Alacufe, the Yamana, and the Ona of Tierra del Fuego and Patagonia, southern Patagonia, traveled by open boat year-round, even in the harshest of winter, wearing no clothing, and they're hardy people. And when the times I've been in that part of the world, 3 times now, I'm rather fixated on it. I traveled those waters, and where I would find a place that looked to be an appropriate anchorage or a campsite, I'd often find shell middens and that sort of thing from these people. And so the concept, I won't bore you with the concept. I know you all know about the concept, but in my mind's eye, this is what I see when I sit back during a work day and think about where I want to be. It looks something like this. And I'm very enamored with small boats and doing this sort of thing. So in my world, it's all about curiosity and respect for the natural world. I respect for people and the authorities of the places I sail. I use the word authorities because I adhere to local authorities. I always wear a life jacket, or if it's, I have one on board, I have all the right safety equipment. I don't cut corners. I like to move quietly, and I like to show respect for people when I camp. If I anchor off their land, I try to let them know. We need seamanship and a wide range of skills. I'm going to dip into that a little bit. I believe in self-sufficiency and having appropriate equipment on board. I also believe in patience and never falling prey to pressure from anyone to do anything. And some people sometimes do this. We meet and they say, "Oh, you sailed in this rough environment. Why don't you go ahead and go out? Nobody else will sail today." I just won't do it. If I don't feel like I'm up to it, I'm not Superman. I'm just like everyone else. So I think this is a key piece, is listen to your own counsel. I believe strongly in planning, thorough planning, and real preparation. I also believe that in the world of many, many boats, a suitable boat for the place I sail is very important. And if you look at some of the videos Roger Barnes has produced and the texts that he has authored, he addresses this question. I think this is very important because many people who are on the walk up the long ladder of experience make bad decisions about suitable boats, and there's great information out there through your organization. I believe the DCA, one of the reasons I'm interested in and now I'm a member of the DCA, is I'd like to publish more, because occasionally we hear about people getting in trouble, and it's not because they're not intelligent, but they pick the wrong boat for the wrong place. And I won't go into that. I know you all know that. I also believe in this very strongly, and I call this just not minding, or having a flexible attitude. And some folks jump into dinghy cruising from a nice, warm, stable home on land, and they become disillusioned because they anchor out, it's rocking, they wake up, their back is sore. You know, they're in a cramped space, things are damp, but it's moving into a mindset of just not minding and realizing that for that little bit of a sacrifice or change in your daily routine, that beautiful sunset, or that, you know, the birds chirping in the morning as you wake up, or the ripples against the hull, are the value there. I truly believe in this term, just not minding. I also believe in a touch of go for it. Sometimes you just have to go for it, tempered with, this is something that sounds a little strange, but I totally believe in this. I think about this. When in doubt, don't. When in doubt, speed up. And this gets back to sailing your boat. Sometimes it's very important, when you're in doubt, just simply don't. There's no hero scenario that needs to be fulfilled. Just simply don't. But there are also times when you're overpowered in your boat, when the leech is, you know, banging away and the jib sheets are twisted up and the wind is increased. Sometimes you have to double up your speed and really go for it and take command of the moment. I hope you understand that. I'm not saying when in doubt, speed up against all odds. I'm not saying that, but there are times when you really have to be more aggressive, because the cascading events of getting in trouble happen, not just one factor. It's usually 1, 2, 3, or 4 factors before you're really in trouble. And sometimes speeding up and becoming more aggressive is the way to get out of a situation. And that requires experience, and experience builds confidence and capability. A recognition that solo sailors are only solo at sea. I believe that people, family, and friends make my solo sailing possible. And above all else, vigilance. Wherever I am in a small boat, if I'm with a group, if I'm by myself, I'm constantly looking around. On my sailing dinghies, when I anchor out, I have a small Japanese bell that I hang, a wind chime bell, from the end of the boom. And if I'm sleeping in a very calm night and that bell starts to ring, vigilance means that I wake up, something has changed. Either there's a boat that's coming by with a wake, or the wind has changed. And so I believe in vigilance. So here are the 4 conditions that this is me, probably not applicable for everyone, but this is how I analyze going out on any day, anytime, 365 days a year. I actually, informally, I used to do this more formally, go through these 4 conditions, and all decisions I make emanate from there. And here they are: cold air, cold water. Number 2, warm air, cold water. Number 3, cold water, warm air. And number 4, warm air, warm water. And if you think about this, condition number 1, if you go to the end of the spectrum, because we're in small boats on large bodies or small bodies of water, wherever, if you're in cold air and cold water, that's the most dangerous place you can be. And therefore, you have to be very cognizant and very thoughtful about the kind of boat that you sail, about the skill level that you've attained, about the clothing that you wear, about the food that you've consumed that day or will consume underway, about all those factors, because those conditions will kill you in an instant. Warm air, cold water, almost as deadly, but that will fool you, okay? It's a warm, sunny day, but the water is frigid cold because of where you are or because of the time of the season. almost as deadly as number one, because, and it maybe even more so, because it might trick you into unzipping your dry suit and wearing it, you know, in half mode, or not being as vigilant. Cold water, warm air, same thing, as deadly or more deadly in some ways. Oh, I did this wrong. I meant, yeah, cold water, warm. I did it twice. Sorry, I made a mistake. It's cold air, warm water for this one. Okay, so that's a typo on my part. Same thing. Okay, those two conditions, just switch them. Same thing. Warm air, warm water is the least dangerous, but you still need to be vigilant. But you can be a lot. That's a warm summer day and not as dangerous. So add current and forecasted weather to this. All decisions I make are based on this information. So with that aside, I'm going to dip into a little bit of what I call the power of dreams. I'll burn through these slides quickly and we'll be at the end of section 1. This is what I see in my mind's eye since I was a small child. I don't know why, but something about this image resonates with me. I can't do this. I can't sail in a big ship like this. I can't explore mysterious lands, but I can. Okay, I can in my own way. When I was a small child, I watched the Irving Johnson film of the Peking sailing around Cape Horn, completely transfixed. And I made that a goal of my life to do that. And by sailing small, as a man who is not a wealthy man, I was able to do that and to sail in some very interesting places. So I basically lived my life as an adventure. That's how I see it every day. When I woke up this morning in the dark, in the winter here in Japan, I hopped on my folding bike because I prefer that over a car. I rode here. And so these are some of the vehicles that I use for adventure. In the upper left-hand corner is a small motor sailor I own. That's a 16-foot, that's a dinghy. That looks like a large boat, but it's not. The boat below it is named Blueberry. There's my Scamp sailing canoe. If you can see my pointer here at the ripe old age of 19, I set off on a big adventure before college. You can see a Hostler SP self-steering gear, trimaran in the corner. And I'm a self-taught boat builder. This is back when I was, I must be 20 in this picture. And I started rebuilding boats. I, at one point in my life, was very inspired by Hannes Lindemann and actually was on stage with Hannes. We presented together some years ago at a small boat symposium. I found him to be very inspirational, and I got into Klepper boats, the folding boats, because of his exploits. Also, I was heavily influenced for the very first time as a boy when I was in the 5th grade by Robert Manry, crossing the Atlantic from Falmouth to Falmouth. I know most of you, or some of you obviously know who Robert Manry is. And I'm friends with his children, his adult children now, Robin and Douglas. Hi, Robin and Douglas. And I have put time into a Tinkerbell project, which I'll touch on in a moment. So this was my first ocean voyaging boat at the age of 19. And this is a bare hull Cape Dory Typhoon that I modified. And many of the modifications I made to this boat, I've held through my life. They worked. I was very inexperienced and had quite a year and a half living aboard this small boat as I voyaged before I went off to university. So I set sail to see the world, and I lived on this 18-foot 6-inch boat with no dinghy, which meant that every trip ashore from anchor was a swim. So I was my own human dinghy back in the day when I had virtually no money and nothing but great dreams of sailing long distance. And I sailed down the east coast of the US into the Bahamas and then back to the US and sold the boat and used that the proceeds to go to college. So those of you who are living in England will see one of my favorite pieces of gear. Back in the day, this is a Hostler SP self-steering gear fitted on that 18.5 footer, which I lived on. Here I am out in the Atlantic sailing. Again, another shot of me on that boat back in the day when, you know, I wore a $5 slicker because that's all I could afford. My second small boat voyage was through the Exuma Islands. It was a cruise aboard a $35 1962 Klepper Arius II with my friend Jim Gillespie. And if you look at the photograph, my pointer, that's our little boat at Warderick Wells. that was quite an adventure. We learned a lot. It was a real live small craft adventure. This is the boat. This klepper I paid $35 for, and every day we were either sewing or cutting off the mast with the Swiss Army knife because it was rotten, but we had the time of our lives. I spent almost 20 years in and out of living in Micronesia in the Western Pacific, and I sailed my canoe there. I also had the opportunity to sail and I am a member of the Thanang clan in Yap. You can see a photo here in the upper right-hand corner of traditional leaders. I'm here sitting next to the famous star navigator Bruno Thanang, and I had the opportunity to learn so much from these people in Micronesia and Yap and Chuuk and Koshrai and Pohnpei, places I've sailed into the outer atolls there aboard my sailing canoe on the left here, which I shipped there in a cardboard box. Here are a few more pictures, -1, of some of my time in Micronesia. Here I am sailing a traditional Yapese outrigger, passing a Pohnpeian sailing canoe in the lagoon. But the entire time I was in this warm environment, I was thinking about this. And this is Cape Horn, up close and personal, from a first trip I made there in a Klepper Arius 1 sailing canoe. And I'm going to do a contrast and comparison between two boats. But the reason I put this photograph here amongst these warm water, warm air photos is this is what I really love. And this is sailing in cold, windy places. So for all of that time that I was there, I was planning to go back, not to Cape Horn. I'd already been there, but to go back to Tierra del Fuego. And this photograph resonates with me. Very few people that I am aware of see Cape Horn up close and personal like this. Most large yachts or ships that round the Horn do it from 5 to 15 miles off, but I lived on the Horn for a week and I was able to explore it and I was able to experience it like that. I'm also a multi-hull sailor. My sail a boat named Blueberry, which is 20 feet. That's sort of the upper end of what I prefer as a sailing dinghy. This is another view of how I live my world in sailing canoes. And my beloved mirror dinghy, the African Queen. The mirror dinghy I consider one of the top 10 great small boats in the world. I know that sounds, maybe some of you thumb your nose at a mirror because of the pram bow. I believe in boats that are capable. And I've done 10 summers of cruising in this boat. The photo on the right is anchored offshore with a tent. I still have a mirror dinghy. I've moved this one onto a friend of mine. I converted it from daggerboard to offset centerboard to offer more sleeping room and enhanced performance. And I love this. I love the mirror dinghy. I think they're absolutely superb small boats. But again, maybe not for everyone. A little too small. My sailing canoe, another one of the boats that I've experimented with sailing on. This is a Philip Rhodes Robin, same size as a mirror, but with the centerboard and a small tent. And this is Tinkerbell's sister ship that I produced. This is Tinkerbell in the Crawford Museum on the right, Manry's boat. And I was offered the opportunity to do the first measurement, complete measurement and inspection of Tinkerbell. And this is we think, a 1938 or 1939 Old Town Whitecap. And I acquired the same era, 1938, 39, 40, Old Town Whitecap in very decrepit condition, and produced this boat, which is an absolute identical sister ship to Tinkerbell, and I have plans. This is my sailing canoe with a poor man's bimini in Micronesia. Same sailing canoe, sliding decks, fore and aft, carbon fiber mast with internal halyards. I can put a tent up on this. A very capable boat. I've done some offshore sailing from Pohnpei, Micronesia to Paquin and Ant atolls, open water crossings, full internal air sponsons, very capable. It has its own set of collapsible wheels, running lights. One of my favorite boats, if not my favorite boat that I've created to date. few shots. This is a boat called the Bufflehead Sailing Canoe that I helped. I had some input in developing with Mead Goujon, Jan Goujon of West System Epoxy, and Hugh Horton. This is a test sail of the Bufflehead prototype. This is my sleep aboard sailing canoe, my little motor sailor, Blueberry, and a boat called Scamp. And we're going to dip into Scamp in a moment. All of this to me proves that there is an absolute leisure class at both ends of the yachting spectrum, whether you're on a 300-foot multi-million-dollar yacht or my small boat. I can anchor in the same place. I can see the same things. And if I was to, for example, want to sail from the east coast of the US to Alaska, I could do it on a large yacht and take 2 years out of my life and a fortune I don't have, or I could simply put my canoe on top of my car and drive there. So that leisure class absolutely works. So in closing the first section, I wanted to mention something that I call the thirds equation, or the small craft advantage. And I see it in very simple terms. Number one is us. And when I say us, it's our cumulative experience and our body weight and height. And I'm a kinetic sailor. I believe in, as many of you do, in sailing your boats flat. The second is the boat and picking the appropriate boat to match the place that you're going to sail. And small boats offer this advantage. I can use me, the sailor, as live ballast, as many of you do. And again, I apologize, I'm singing to the choir, but if there are new sailors tuned in today, this is why I continue to go smaller and smaller and smaller, as opposed to going the other way, larger and larger and larger. Most sailors tend to go, my next boat is going to be bigger. I try to get down to my next boat as being smaller, because then I become the live ballast. And when I take the sailor, me, and juxtapose it against the boat, and then add an appropriate sail rig in size and in configuration, simple lug rig, or in the case of my Scamp, I did a certain rig I created with John Welsford for that boat. Then I'm in control. I'm live ballast. The boat can be sailed flat. The sail rig is not overpowering. That's why for my sailing canoe, I built a carbon fiber mast. It only weighs 4 pounds. I can overpower. I can be the one controlling the boat. The boat doesn't control me. Going back to one of the first slides, sail in control. Don't let your boat control you in those moments. So that's the end of part one. I'd like to offer everyone the 5-minute stretch, and then we'll come back and dip into a contrast and comparison of 2 small boats that I built for sailing voyages. So I'll see you all back in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
So do you want to take some questions at this point, Howard?
Sure. Be happy to.
Because I thought it was splendid when you're talking about person-to-person international diplomacy and relatable dreams. I thought that's excellent. And someone has asked, Jan Weber has asked, indeed, what languages do you communicate in when you're doing your small boat sailing?
I have bare command of English. I speak a little Spanish and a tiny bit of Japanese. You know, Roger, I think I've probably had the same experience that you and others have had when we engage with other cultures. I can't say that if I showed up in France that I speak French, but you know what I found? Maybe you found the same thing. I find that people are attracted. I've watched in a large marina, people walk right by the big boats and they come to the small boat. Smiles, hand gestures, if I don't speak the language, laughter, self-effacing humor. It works. And then what happens, it often happens, is come eat. In Micronesia, people say this means come eat. And so when you break bread with people, the language almost doesn't matter. I try to do my best to have working, basics of, hello, goodbye, where's the store? But I'm not multilingual by any means. The boat does it.
No, I think you're exactly right. There is some in a large yacht and in a small boat, and you don't meet people in a yacht. There is something about turning up in a yacht that makes yachts are just innately ostentatious. Even an old wooden yacht, there is something about the signals it gives that people don't feel they can approach you. Whereas, yes, if you turn up in a small boat, they instantly say, it may be a certain amount of pity for your what they perceive to be your discomfort, but they almost inevitably say, would you like to come round to my place to eat? Exactly that.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that then, yes, you're eating people.
I actually, it sounded a little corny, but I actually believe it's an act of effective international diplomacy. It's a way that small boats just do it. It opens people up. Any other questions, Roger?
Joe Murphy down here says, can you tell us anything about Tinkerbell's sister? Well, did you actually sail that? Did you experience what it's like to sail?
Not yet. I've yet to finish the mast on that boat. I'm in Japan right now. The boat is, the last step will be the mast, and I make my own sails. I'll be making sails for it. So it's an Old Town Whitecap that came to me in very poor condition. And it had a brand new centerboard trunk installed, very nicely done, but not as per Manry's boat. So I've always been fascinated with Manry's boat, and I petitioned by letter the Crawford Museum, and the curator there, a lovely man, Eric Rivette, said, hey, he read about me and he said, please, you're welcome. They opened their facility to me, and I went with my friend Gary Ganad, and I discovered some things. They allowed me I was the first person to be able to board the boat. We did it with nitrile gloves on, and it was down below. Learned many secrets about how Manry did that, little compartments in the way he built the boat. And interestingly enough, they gave me access to their workshop. And so on a Sunday when there was no one in the museum, I was there, and I went back into the workshop where they had old Model T cars and things. And Manry broke 2 rudders on his Atlantic crossing. And I was looking for a tape measure, and I looked up on the shelf, and there was the broken rudder stuck under some gear. And I brought it out and learned about his different size rudders and exactly how he fixed that at sea. And so what I did with the Old Town Whitecap is I removed that perfectly good centerboard trunk and recreated his adjustable or drop fixed keel. And people thought it was a centerboard boat, or a daggerboard boat. It's not. It's a fixed keel cruiser. The daggerboard drops down, and there are 2 bolts that bolt it in place, and there's a triple steel plate on the bottom. And I recreated that exactly. I recreated the portholes. I even found mistakes. He was an amateur builder. He made certain small errors in measurements, and I recreated those exactly. So when the boat sails, it will sail precisely the same. I searched for the right hardware, the right shivs, even the same pump. I've been through 6 pumps to get the right bilge pump. So that's, I don't know if that answers the question, but I'll be sailing the boat soon, and I think it's going to be fascinating when it happens. Okay,
Matthew Sullivan asked, sorry, just one more question. Matthew Sullivan has asked, what do you think you spend on boating every year? Money-wise, how much do you spend?
Well, that's a good question. Depends on the year. The Scamp that you're about to see, for example, I built that boat over a period of 4 summers because I was overseas, and I would come back and work on it for a period of time. So I can't really say, I don't spend much. My mirror dinghy, for example, I paid $100 for. It was a wreck, and I rebuilt it. I use the theory of triple uses for everything I have on a boat. I have my gear organized so I can take gear from this boat, the essential things. Roger, you probably might do the same, but the same fall weather gear, the same dry suit, the same cook kit goes to this boat. I move it to this boat. So I don't spend a lot, but when I go off on a voyage, I obviously spend some money, and I don't accept sponsorship. I don't seek it. I don't think I'm worthy of it. I don't believe in it. I see people slathering stickers all over their boats with, and making deals with companies. I just don't do that. So when I don't have funds, I don't go. And when I do, I'm free. I'm free to make my own decisions.
Very interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. So should I go ahead and move on?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So welcome to the second part of my program. And this one I hope is a little more interesting than the first. And this is a contrast and comparison of two small sailing boats I voyaged aboard in Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. I've sailed in the Canary Islands and the Pacific and Europe and other places, but here's an opportunity to look at two boats that were essentially built or put together for the same purpose, and how I went about that and the results. So on the left-hand side is a Klepper Arius 1 folding kayak made by the Klepper company in Germany. And this model is called a Red Black, and this is a shot taken by a friend of mine in New York where I train. You can actually see the World Trade Centers in the background. The Klepper company at that time was located on Union Square in the US, Klepper North America. And this is my new boat. I purchased it from Klepper, and then I modified it. I made many, many modifications to it. The sail rig wasn't the same. Many things changed. The boat on the right is my friend Stu Buchanan's lovely painting of a John Welsford Scamp. And just to give you an idea of why I make modifications, it doesn't mean that the Klepper was a bad boat or John Scamp was a bad boat, but John and I are dear friends. We've been friends for a long time. We have a very common, he's probably listening to this, so I don't want to speak for him, but we think the same in many regards. I have great regard for him. And so I moved forward on making modifications to his perfectly good design to make it the right boat for the place I was going. A Scamp is a capable boat, but it's really not designed to sail in the Southern Ocean, but it can be if modified correctly. And I'm going to go through those modifications for you. Okay, let me see. Why won't this move forward? Something has gone awry here. Here we go. So 2 voyages and 2 concepts. 2 small boat voyaging concepts and the lessons that I've learned. The first was, it turned out it was a 90-day plan, but it was 91 days solo aboard a wood canvas sailing canoe through the Beagle Channel and twice around Cape Horn. I went from east to west and then back west to east around the Horn. And then the second was a planned 90-day solo voyage down the Strait of Magellan into the southwest islands of Tierra del Fuego and out into the Southern Ocean aboard a John Welsford modified Scamp, which is hull number 2, the hull right after the prototype. So here are the 2 boats again, and on the left-hand side, you can see the Beagle Channel. That's the Klepper Arius 1. And on the right-hand side, you can see the highly modified Scamp. And I'm going to get into some of there are many things happening on the Scamp that are not at all what a Scamp is designed to be. And there are many things on the left-hand side in the Klepper that are not stock. So the dilemma that I faced when I looked at the first trip that I wanted to make to Tierra del Fuego and down into the Wollaston Islands and then back up into the Beagle Channel was, what kind of boat should I take? Well, at the time, I realized that money was really an issue. Both had to be self-contained in all regards and home between 90 and 100 days. Affordability was a prime consideration, as I do not engage in sponsorship or having others fund my lifestyle. Seaworthiness, they had to provide shelter at sea. They had to be capable of carrying 90 to 110 days worth of food, able to be self-rescued. able to be pulled onto land, able to be repaired without outside assistance. And this is why. The dynamics of the place. If you look at this artist depiction of Antarctica from above, and if you look at the pink line here, that's the Drake Passage. This is the tip of South America. This is where I'm rather obsessed with, of all places on the earth. And here's the dynamic. If you can see my arrow, the winds blow around the 40-degree latitudes unimpeded. They're called the Roaring 40s, as we all know. There's New Zealand. And so what happens is when these winds blow across the Southern Ocean, they become constricted between a huge ice cube and much warmer land. And so the temperature differential and the shallowness, relative shallowness, and the constriction, if you apply Bernoulli's principle, this makes this place arguably probably the most challenging place to sail in the world, certainly the most challenging place I've ever sailed. And that challenge to me is very interesting because the Roaring 40s hit the western side of South America, the western coast, the Southwest Islands, which are rarely, if ever, no one goes there. It's a crazy place to go because those Roaring 40 winds don't just hit the Southwest Islands and the Strait of Magellan and the Beagle Channel and Cape Horn. They bend and twist around those islands, and the currents that are driven there also are torrential. They rip through those constricted passages because the tip of South America is simply multiple mountains sticking up out of the ocean, and the hydraulics are huge and dangerous, and the winds are unpredictable. The katabatic winds blow down mountains. The willy-waw is the common term used. And during my first trip, but more so on my second trip there, on the second trip, I experienced not one willy-waw or 10. I lost count, hundreds of them. And indeed, the unraveling of my trip, in the end, the most challenging point was due to the willy-waws and something else I'll touch on. So this is Punta Arenas. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this, but this is a clip of John Welsford. We had a little audio when we were practicing this the other day, Roger and Jennifer and Keith and I and Edward. I hope you can hear this, but if not, I'll narrate it. Maybe someone can pop up and say it's okay. But this is Punta Arenas on the Strait of Magellan on the first trip that John and I took there. And I won't play the whole clip, but you'll see John and and he's talking about the wind being, or the air being dense. This is the height of summer. People are wearing winter coats, and in their summer, it's always freezing cold there. If you were to fall in this water, you'd have about 5 minutes before you'd become incapable. And so here we go. Howdy, John. How you doing?
Doing good. A little crazy today, huh?
Well, in that clip, John is saying, if you couldn't hear it, it's blowing about 30 and the air is very dense. It's a very dangerous place to sail. So let's take a look at, excuse me, the concept one, the Klepper Arius 1 red black. This is a photograph of the boat that I sailed around Cape Horn, Tierra del Fuego. This happens to be in Yap, the island of Yap, and you can see a men's house in the background and some stone money just as a cultural piece. So the attributes of the Klepper Arius 1, it's affordable to obtain and to travel with. It folds. Affordable, it's an expensive kayak, but relatively speaking, it's an affordable boat. It is the most expensive of the folding boats still to this date, I believe, but certainly worth the money. Kleppers have done some amazing things. They've crossed the Atlantic. They've, been to the North and South Pole with Admiral Byrd, etc. I took one around Cape Horn twice. They're built to NATO military specifications. And in part of my work with Klepper, I did NATO and US Special Forces training in folding boats and had the opportunity to author the folding boat section for the US Special Forces Marops manual. And I got involved in the Klepper because I wanted to use the Klepper. So of all the boats that I could have chosen for that first trip, I could have taken a hard boat, a hull, but instead I went for a folding boat, and it was a great choice. It's a boat that I became 100% familiar with, and that means that I learned everything about it. I learned how to repair it. I worked in New York with the Klepper people. I bought my boat from them, so I owned it. I didn't owe anyone anything for it. I'd have made my own sails for it. I really understood it. I also took it into a high school swimming pool, as you'll see in with the Scamp, and I capsized it. I flipped it over. I climbed all over it. I learned everything I could about using it. It offers 3 levels of stability when it's flat on the water, when it heels to one side, the first chine, when it heels further to the air sponson. And those 3 levels of stability make it a very, very seaworthy boat. It's extremely seaworthy, again, due to the full length air chambers. And I made a sea sock that I sat in. When I got in the boat, I was actually encapsulated into a cloth sea sock. And if the boat capsized, on its side, I could pull a handle and that sea sock would actually empty the cockpit out of water. And I would be able to get back in and sail or paddle away without doing any bailing. It's able to be sailed and paddled. It's flexibility by design. The boat is not stiff. If you were standing with a Klepper Arius 1 in front of you, empty or loaded, empty, and picked up the transom and shook it up and down, you go, wow, this thing is really floppy and flexible. That's actually, with its wave-piercing bow, a tremendous seaworthiness feature. And I picked that particular boat for that reason. I also picked it because it was wood, and in the big waves of the Southern Ocean, that flexibility and wave-piercing capability of the bow section was very important. It's easy to anchor. I carried one simple Danforth, a homemade Danforth. It's tough Hypalon hull. It's simple to repair and field with leather lacing, glue, and tape, strangely as that sounds. It's lightweight, easy to manage on and off the beach, easily righted, easily re-entered, and sailed away with some bailing required in the event of a capsize. As I mentioned, it would be a pull of a handle on a sea sock while the boat is on its side. It's easily managed by one person at sea through kinetic movements, so I could hike out and sail it flat, and it worked perfectly in the conditions that I sailed in. Here are the negatives. It's uncomfortable over long periods of time. It's a 15-foot boat, and there was barely room in the boat for me because I had 90 days supply of food and minimal equipment. I incorporate with any trip I make what I call a 25% rule. And just before I leave, even though I've pared everything down to the minimum, the day or two before I take off for a trip, either driving or wherever I go, I try to lose 25% of what I have. I do away with the second flashlight or the extra bag of something. I've never hit that 25%, but in this case, the boat was jam-packed and I had huge deck loads, which you'll see in a moment. It's unable to carry an adequate supply of food for 90 days. It had to be deck loaded, and food was cached on land. I dug a hole and buried a cache of food on land, which I actually never made it back to. The hull and deck can be punctured. It has an open cockpit. I made a sea sock and I had a cloth cockpit enclosure. And more importantly, or most importantly, the Armada de Chile officers were very skeptical when I arrived on inspection of the boat, as they had not grasped that it folded in spite of documented paperwork and permission to go. When I finally got to Tierra del Fuego, to Puerto Williams, they refused to let me go on my trip. I was told flat, no, we didn't know you were bringing that flimsy thing. They didn't understand it. It's not an optimal sailing craft upwind, but it's quite passable. So here's my dear friend and training partner, Eric Stiller. He and his father were the Klepper importers for the US. I moved to New York, and Eric and his girlfriend and I shared an apartment, and he and I trained like a couple of wacko commandos on the Hudson River. In the dead of winter, we would run down around the World Trade Center. We lifted weights in the basement of the old dusty Klepper shop. I ate copious amounts of food. I gained 25 pounds. So for a year, I trained seriously. And this particular day was one of many days, but we're out in, I don't know what it is in Celsius, but this is 15 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. And our boats are completely encased in ice. I was completely encased in ice. And these were important training days because I never actually faced this condition, but I could have. If my trip would have, if I would have gotten stuck on the Southwest Islands or in Cape Horn and winter was approaching, I might have had to survive in these conditions. I also sailed in extremely cold conditions with only wearing a pair of shorts. And I also immersed my hands in buckets of ice water and would watch TV, listen to the radio to condition myself. This happens to be in November, just before I left, a month before I left. This is kill you cold water, but I'm only in a pair of shorts and I conditioned myself. This is the boat that I used to toughen myself. So this is the boat that I have. You can see the deck load. The bags here are each carries 2 weeks supply of food. I'm sorry, a month's supply of food. And then this is another month supply of food. Then I had a 4-deck bag. I carried flags of, I carried the United Nations. I carried the Chilean flag and the Argentinian flag. And I flew an American Burgee because I came there at the tail end of a shooting war between Argentina and Chile. And so when I would see the brown gunboat coming, I could display the Chilean flag, or the black gunboat, the Chilean flag. The brown gunboat would approach. If they did, I could display the Argentinian flag. It was pretty tense when I was there. I actually ended up walking through a live minefield on Cape Horn that was set by the Argentinian army. So here's a quick walk through that voyage, Cape Horn solo. There it is, the iconic Cape Horn. I had the opportunity to live there for a week. It's, of course, located at the tip of South America. You can see the roaring 40s and the constriction and the huge ice cap. That trip, I flew from Punta Arenas, Chile on a Chilean naval aircraft to Porto Williams. In Porto Williams, my permission was denied. I could not go. After all that preparation, they just didn't like the fact that I had a folding boat. And I had some adventure there that was kind of a problem. So I basically gave up until I met a man who worked at the Chilean base. He was a civilian. And I was told that I could go across the El Dente Navarino Mountains by horseback with my boat folded up on the back to Bahia Windhound. And there was a hermit that lived there because the Chilean Army or Chilean Navy didn't say I couldn't sail around Cape Horn. They said I couldn't cross this passage. That's all they said. They said, sorry, but you can't go from here to there. So that meant I couldn't go here. That was their soft way of saying you can't go. But if I went across the mountains and got to here, I could make my way around there. In the end, you'll see that I had to give up. I boarded a 90-foot ferro cement junk rig thing bound for Antarctica. And I was bound to spend 6 months in Antarctica with a crazy crew of people. But instead, I jumped ship here and made it through the Wollaston Islands and then back up into the Western Beagle Channel to here, where I then looked into the Southwest Islands and vowed that someday I would return. My second trip started here in Punta Arenas aboard the Scamp, and I sailed down the Strait of Magellan to Isla Dawson and out here into the Southern Ocean and back to this point. And then my trip concluded, and then I made it to Porto Williams. So history, everyone knows Cape Horn is a rough place. I mentioned I've always been fascinated by the people who inhabited that part of the world, absolutely fascinated by their culture to this day. And they lived simply. They lived off the sea. The places that I would find that appeared to be someplace I could actually anchor or get ashore, I'd often find remnants of the Yaghan people who traveled in open canoes. This could have been in the dead of winter. I don't know. And sadly, these people are no longer exist. There is some bloodline left, but it's mixed. They died of the common cold and other maladies that were introduced by Western explorers and missionaries. They could live rough like this, but they could not tolerate Western disease. And so the last of them is sadly a skeletal remain in a museum that John Welsford and I visited in Porvenir and Tierra del Fuego. So this is Cape Horn. This is Puerto Williams. These are the El Dente Navarino Mountains that I attempted to cross, but gave up due to a winter storm. And I don't know anything about horses and mules, not a good idea. And so back in the day, this is what Puerto Williams looked like. And I came back here to give up. I was going to fly out of Puerto Williams. And then lo and behold, one ship showed up on the Beagle Channel. And this is the ship. This is the MV Heraclitus. And this ship was bound for Antarctica in spite of the way it looks. And aboard were a number of young people, one of which was one of the 7 Earth biospherians who was in the biosphere in Oracle, Arizona after this. And they were sailing to Antarctica to collect plankton samples to enter into the ocean there. This is the captain of the ship. Everyone on the ship had a fake name. I don't know what his name is, but he called himself Ibis after the bird, and there was Gubernador and some very crazy people. And so then I petitioned the Armada. They agreed to let me come aboard as a crew. And I was bound for Antarctica across the Drake Passage. This is the expedition leader, who was one of the eventual Earth biospherians. And this is the junk rig. Some of these people were on deck in bare feet. And so my boat was on deck, and I got nervous because this boat was in such poor condition. I was afraid the rig would come down and crush the boat. So I strapped it into the bollards, and we set off for the Drake Passage. And this is on the Drake Passage, and the boat rolled so much that my boat was sometimes underwater. You can see water on the spray skirt, and I was losing equipment. I lost my spare mast, I lost my spare boom. And so finally I said, look, I don't want to go to Antarctica. I'm now across Bahia Nassau, the passage. Can you just drop me in the ocean? And I'm on my own. So I was dropped. You can see the boat here. And dropped, and I made my way from the Heraclitus. This is us sailing across. There it is in rough weather. And I made my way to just north of Cape Horn. And I was in this place, and very, very rough place where I was stuck for 10 days. I couldn't move because of the wind. I had 1 day of travel. And then you can see this little dot. I was stuck on this island about 10 miles from Cape Horn for another 10 days. So in the first 20 days of my trip, I actually moved for 1 day, but I consumed 20 days of food. And this is what it looked like. I took this picture of myself because I had an experience, sort of an out-of-body experience, where in that 20 days, I was literally in my tent, this tiny one-man tent the entire time. I thought everybody, one morning I woke up, I thought everyone I'd ever known or seen on the street had erased me from their mind. Just thought I'd mention it. It's one thing that solo sailors sometimes can go through. So I broke camp, got aboard my boat when the weather improved, and made my way to Cape Horn. This is approaching the Horn. And while I was on Cape Horn, a ship showed up, a Chilean Armada ship, and aboard was a British rower, John Ridgway. And John Ridgway was on the island for about a half an hour, and we met. And if you look in the background here, you can see this strange looking fence line. This is actually one of the fences around the live unmapped minefield. And John was on the island with a German filmmaker, and they were there to film Cape Horn and do some sort of a TV show or something about people around Cape Horn. And he was one of the people that I read about, he and Shea Bly rowing across the Atlantic years ago. That was an interesting experience. These were the 3 naval ranks. who were on Cape Horn without a boat for 3 months. They would rotate out. Noe, Marcelo, and Carlos, we became steadfast friends. I lived in the hut there for a week waiting for conditions. We had one day where in the middle of the night, Noe here woke me up because one man was always awake manning the radio. The ionometer was pegged at 90 knots of wind, and we received a call from a British yacht named the Pilar, and the captain of the Pilar was radioing seeking refuge at Bahia Orange, and he spoke English. No, he didn't. So I communicated with the captain of the British yacht, the Pilar, who said that they had one owner and crew of 13. And that was the last we heard of them. This is walking on Cape Horn, the day that I accidentally walked through the live minefield because I didn't know it was a live minefield. We had great fun. They taught me how to dance the national dance, the Cueca, and I taught them how to jitterbug. I gave them one of my cameras and they took this photo. This is the day that I took off and rounded Cape Horn. This is walking down to the water, and Marcelo took this picture. This is the day I've got my sail rig on deck and I paddled out into, this is paddling east, and I had a very untypical east wind. It usually blows out of the west, but I waited for a week. I had an east wind. It was a little breezy. It was blowing about 25 knots. And so I paddled out, popped my sail up, headed off and around the Horn, and had quite an adventure. You can't really see me here, but I'm actually right there. And that photo was taken by Marcelo as I returned 2 days later. Just some shots of the backside of Cape Horn up close. They made some home brew they called chicha, and we had a little celebration when I was done. And then I went north again on my own back to Puerto Williams and then west up the Beagle Channel, where I met Skip Novak and the Pelagic, a yacht that sails off and on to Cape Horn. And they had me aboard one night for a dinner. This is, you can see the deck load on my boat and my sail rig. And then, oddly enough, in the far western Beagle Channel, I ran into a German kayaker. And he was on this little skinny yellow and red kayak, and he was in, frankly, he was in serious trouble. His dry suit had failed. He'd been rescued by the Armada once. He was in trouble. So I offered to strap my boat to his. I made a catamaran and I sailed him back. I cut my trip short and with respect to him. We sailed for a week, living aboard, cooking aboard, and we would inflate a dry bag inside the hatch of the cockpit of his boat. And then one of us would lay on here with a strap around the hull and sleep while I sailed my boat. You can see here, this is where we found an old oar, and that's the inflatable thing we would sleep on inside the cockpit. And I strapped his boat to mine, and we sailed down the Beagle Channel, and we stopped at one point. We were camped on land in Argentina, and you can see this is a military base, a Carbonaros base in Argentina. Our kayaks are there on the beach. We were softly detained, I would say, by the Argentinian Carbonaros because we didn't have visas to be in Argentina. We were kind of locked in this building, but it was soft. It was not too punitive, and daily, we were entertained by the captain, who would do Jerry Lewis comedy routines. And then after 2 days, we were let go. But you can see he's got holes in his dry suit. He didn't have any food left. And I was fortunate to be able to help him. When I did, I got back to Puerto Williams. The Navy had a little thing, and they presented me with this certificate. I didn't know they were going to do that I sailed around Cape Horn. So that is the concept, the first section of my program, second section. And now what I'd like to do is, if you would like to take a break, we can for 5 minutes, and I'll then conclude the final chapter. Or if you'd like me just to roll on, I'll roll on. Does anyone have any druthers either way? Or Roger, any questions?
I think we probably should roll on, really. I have to say I'm gobsmacked by by you sailing around Cape Horn, even though I knew you did it. But seeing the photographs, I can remember when you shared pictures of doing it in the Scamp, which we're just coming up to. And I thought it looked like, because Scotland is beautiful. I've sailed a lot in Scotland, but on a bad day in Scotland, it looks a bit like the Beagle Channel, and that sort of greyness and grimness and just the sense of you're absolutely out there in a wild environment that's giving no quarter. And I thought, wow, and it's like Scotland on steroids. And every single picture you shared was like that. It was all very bleak, very windy, very exposed. Yes,
Well, it really was. And, in spite of being in that small boat, I fared fairly well. I lost 35 pounds. But here's the thing that maybe would be of some value. Thank you for recognizing the hydraulics and the windy place and all that. This was the thing, my hands. All right, that's the equalizer for dinghy sailors. And for me, for sure, I had a very elaborate hand glove system, but still all of these joints were open to the bone from here on these fingers, almost to the bone on all of them, from wet, cold, snow, sleet, salt water, fresh water, cold, wet, never got dry in spite of my glove system. So this is really key for dinghy sailors. I just wanted to say that. So as much as I loved the trip, I was in pain most of the time, and it took a long time for my hands to come back. But so if there are no questions, I'm going to roll on to
this. Let's roll on to the Strait. It's Magellan. I always said Magellan, but it's obviously Magellan. As you've been there, you're going to know. Right?
The Chileans call it Mayanas.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you. I apologize for all the slides, but I was told by my friends at Dinghy Cruising that lots of images might be good. Okay. So concept 2, a different boat, a different voyage. Even though I'm in the same place, I knew that this trip, I had no intention of going around Cape Horn again. Okay. That I'd already been there. But what is a misunderstanding by many people is that, wow, Cape Horn is the place. That's the roughest place in the world. That's the Mount Everest for sailors. But actually, it's not. Okay, it's right up there. But there's another place that's more treacherous. If you were in Tierra del Fuego or Patagonia and you speak to the Centolla fishermen or you speak to locals, but particularly if you speak to the Armada, and John Welsford and I traveled to, my dear friend John offered to join me 1 year before I did this trip because I'd been there before. I was a good citizen. I wanted them to approve my boat this time because last time they had a hard time with the boat until I did it. And then they loved it. This time I couldn't take the chance of shipping a boat there and having them refuse because of the size or the fact that it wasn't seaworthy. They might not understand it. So John and I went there a year before. We traveled for a month together through Chile. We had meetings with the Armada, and he can attest to the fact that I know for a fact that Cabo Forward, the tip of the Brunswick Peninsula, is much more dangerous than Cape Horn. There's the eastern arm of the Strait of Magellan, there's the western arm, and at the tip of South America, the contiguous drive you can make from Canada down to the tip of South America actually ends at Cabo Forward. And there's a wind there called the Pantanero wind or the cemetery wind, because it literally blows so hard. It has a history of blowing headstones out of the ground. And so when you add that to the hydraulics, crossing the Strait of Magellan at Cabo Forward is much more dangerous, in my opinion, than going around Cape Horn. And so this concept of this boat was to be a predominantly reaching boat that had to also have the capability of sailing upwind and surviving the Strait of Magellan, particularly Cabo Forward, that long open water passage, and then to be able to make it through the Southwest Islands. And if in the event, I'm almost done here, if in the event I got to the Southern Ocean and something really bad happened, I could have made an 800-mile or so passage to South Georgia. As odd as that sounds, I had the capability, as you'll see, to have done that if all had gone bad, if I'd been injured, if I'd lost the mizzen mast or whatever, and was forced by weather to continue eastward. This boat was built to handle that situation. So I did meet one yacht, one boat in the 62 days that I was actually underway. And this photo was taken by a yacht from England, actually. The 60-foot Novara had just sailed in from the Falklands and was really moving under motor to, like I am, to get to safety. They were going to a place called Quetta because there was a major front coming that blasted Tierra del Fuego. And we met. And they took this photograph and later sent it to me. And if you look up SV Novara on the internet, you can find their website and all the places they've been. They were blown ashore in, I'm trying to remember, it was either South Georgia or the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica, and almost lost the boat. They had to, have it pulled off. But as they came motoring up, they couldn't believe that they saw this little boat. And they motored up and very kindly yelled over, "Are you okay? Do you need food and water?" And I yelled back, "I'm fine. I've got plenty. Are you in need?" And we laughed and parted ways. So the reason I wanted to go back was to sail into a place where few people actually ever go, because who would want to go there? And these are the southwest islands of Tierra del Fuego. This is a shot or an artist depiction of Joshua Slocum sailing into what's called the Milky Way. And the Milky Way is just this smattering of islands. If you recall back to the beginning of my presentation, well, I'm off this big island and this uncharted. There's no depth. There are no compass bearings here on the charts. It's just white. It's because people don't go in there to some of these places. There's so many islands that these hydraulics move through and the wind bends around and there are no trees. It's just barren. And Joshua Slocum got lost in there. And this is the morning after the Milky Way artist depiction, and he barely made it out. And interestingly enough, in one of the clips you'll see in a moment, when I crossed the Strait of Magellan at Cabo Froward, I made it into an anchorage where Joshua Slocum had anchored, a place called Bahia Zigzag, and I had to anchor in exactly the same spot. And that was the first time I cracked open the book, which I brought with me, Sailing Alone Around the World. So I wanted to know the boat again that I sailed. So John Welsford and I have taught many Scamp build classes, and here's a picture of he and I working together. And I've continued on teaching group builds, but in the beginning, I volunteered to do this, and John and I did this together because I wanted to know everything about the boat. So I bought a kit. I bought hull number 2 and number 3. My plan was to build number 2 as a stock boat, sail it, and then customize number 3. But in the end, I built so many Scamps with John, and we taught classes in how to manage the boat and sail it. I took John on his first sail ever in a Scamp, as you'll see in a photograph. But I learned so much that I just built number 2. And you can see in this Scamp build here, this is my boat and other boats that I'm instructing the build of. So I sat down one day and I sketched, these are my original sketches of what would I do? I did this in a restaurant in Port Townsend, Washington. And I wrote down, what would I do to this perfectly acceptable design to make it more appropriate for what I intend to do and what it might face? And all of these things virtually happened when I finally built the boat. And so you can see on the left here, such things as a 4-pocket halyard bag, dinghy storage. I carried a dinghy on my dinghy, as you'll see, 250 feet of shoreline on both sides of the cabin. I added bulkheads that weren't there before. I made an inflatable cuddy cabin so that the boat would never turn turtle. Oar storage under the coamings, aft anchor storage, all these things. I'm going to move on to what I actually did. All of those things came true. And so on this boat, there is a head stay. There's no head stay or forestay. It's integrated into the sail. Each head sail went out and came back with its furler. I never had to leave the cockpit. I could remotely send a sail out, hoist it, unfurl it, furl it, bring it back into the cockpit, and then put the staysail out. The main had double reefs. I'll go to the cabin because this is an incredibly important feature. I made a door, I filled in these bulkheads, and inside the cabin, I could inflate this area completely. And so the boat could capsize onto its side, but it could not remain upside down in a turtle position. It would come back onto its side. Of course, I changed the rig from the perfectly acceptable lug rig. John was great as my dear friend and excellent designer. We created the rig for the boat, and then I built it. I built a hollow bird's mouth spar, freestanding, no stays needed. Okay, now this is a system that I came up with that you'll see in a little more detail. Without this running shroud, this is not fixed. The mast can stand on its own, no problem. I can have full sail up in blasting winds and the mast is fine, but there is no backstay. So in order to induce headstay tension, I made Dyneema shrouds through a turning block back to an integrated halyard winch, and I could then crank in headstay tension on either tack. I have a winch here and a winch here, which you'll see in photographs. I also cross-sheeted the jib or the staysail. The staysail was trimmed from up here, the jib from here. These are hiking seats that have padding. The entire cockpit and the cockpit sole is padded, so it offered warmth. The padding was affixed to the boat, so it offered more buoyancy. And in the event that I fell down, I wouldn't end up with an elbow pointer or, bruised knee. So everything is padded in the boat. In the back, there are transom vents. I'll get into momentarily here. The reason I could survive for weeks in open ocean, for example, if I had to make a long passage in the Roaring Forties, I could run, for example, if the boat was pooped and the cockpit was filled, this would be inflated and would not take on water. Everything was watertight. These transom vents would, without my doing anything, would bleed off huge gallons of water without my doing anything. I could then reach down to the cockpit and flick a switch for a 35-gallon per minute pump, which would pump the boat. I carried 4 12-volt batteries under the floor, which you'll see a picture of, that could run that pump, I calculated, almost straight for 2 weeks. And that's the only reason I had those batteries. They were for no other purpose. They also offered another 100 pounds of ballast adjacent to the 175 pounds of water ballast in the boat. I also had a 10-gallon per minute manual pump mounted, you'll see in the back of the cockpit, and I had a bucket. So, and on top of that, I had 2 Elfstrom maxi boat bailers. I built a footwell in the boat. And so I had a redundancy of keeping the water out, but this was my most effective method above all else. And I recommend this kind of bucket, a heavy-duty rubber farm bucket with a lanyard. So again, I had transom vents. I had 2 maxi boat bailers in a footwell because the boat wasn't designed with a footwell. I had a 35-gallon per minute pump on an electric pump on a switch. And I had a 10-gallon per minute whale gusher to keep the water out. I shipped the boat to Chile in a box that friends of mine built for me. And then I finished. The boat sat on this padding, the skegs here, and was strapped in place, fully loaded, ready to go out of the box. And in the end, John Welsford and I used this as a work shop. You couldn't really stand up in it. It's about 5 feet tall, but very effective. So this is the boat on the beach on the Strait of Magellan. And I wanted to show this feature. You can see the footwell, but I can sail this Scamp in driving rain or snow to an anchor spot. I can drop the anchor and I can be in a completely dry cockpit under a tent in about 10 minutes. And the way that I do that is I made 2 of these dry floors, and they form fit over the cushions, over the cushion, and they close up at the footwell. And so these are waterproof. And so what I would do is I put the tent up, and I carried 2 tents. This is my high wind tent. I'll show you the other one in a moment. And then inside, everything is sopping wet, but I would then open up one of these 2 dry floors, put it in place, and then I was in a dry cockpit without having to dry anything. And then I could start to get warm and dry. So the attributes of the Scamp are seaworthy as built, but even more seaworthy for, again, I modified a boat for the place I sailed. I wouldn't necessarily do this to any other Scamp, but I'm so pleased with the changes I made that I love the boat to this day. So it's seaworthy as built, but certainly seaworthy as built as I modified it. It's extremely strong, as you'll see in a moment. I also made some changes to the way the boat was built. Extremely strong boat. Cannot say more than that. In the event of capsize, is able to be rerighted, re-entered, and sailed away without bailing. I think that this is a capability that many small boats do not have. And here's the key part: sail away without bailing. A lot of small boats have centerboard trunks that are too low and water keeps coming in, and et cetera. So it's capsize averse. It's very difficult to capsize, but I can rewrite it in 15 seconds. I can re-enter it in 10 or 15 seconds more, well, maybe 30 seconds more, and I can immediately sail away without bailing. And that's very important if you're off a lee shore or in some kind of trouble. It's comfortable and warm, very warm below. Everything was padded, so I was always comfortable, sort of. It has full buoyancy due to the design. The design is extremely strong. John designed a brilliant little boat of boxes, okay? The boat is divided by bulkheads and square features inside, and all that is in watertight hatches and has full buoyancy. I added more buoyancy with the dry bags that I packed in. Everything was packed in dry bags. More buoyancy with the fixed in cushions, more buoyancy with the inflatable cuddy cabin. It's capable of easily carrying enough food for 90 days. It's a very good sailing boat. Okay, all things said, it's 11 feet, 11 inches long with a 10-foot, 10-inch or so waterline. So if you want to go fast, get a motorcycle. But I think the boat sails particularly well, and particularly with the rig I have on it. I really love it, and I believe that it's a very, very good design. I chose it for this purpose: downwind, downwave. The Scamp has a very rounded bottom, lots of rocker, very flat. It does have a stem. I love boats with beautiful stems. I love a pointed bow more than anything, but the Scamp has an attribute that I purposely picked this boat for this one particular reason: downwind, downwave. In the Southern Ocean, surfing down 40-foot waves, I don't mean to sound dramatic, but don't be fooled. Those 40-foot waves might be 200 feet long, but it's definitely high speed down the face of a wave. With that rocker and the fullness forward, I can steer it. I can sort of like downhill bump skiing, sail downwind, downwave. And at the bottom of the wave, it doesn't have a long stem. It's not going to purl or stick its bow into the wave and then stagger, okay? And it's so buoyant forward, it's going to pop back up and keep going. That short 10-inch stem also means it's not going to root. If I start sailing downwind and the hull, it starts to heel, because we should sail our boats flat. And when any boat heels, it becomes asymmetrical. And when a boat the shape becomes from symmetrical to asymmetrical, a long stem can work against you, because it'll continue to drive to starboard, or if it heels to starboard, it'll continue to drive to port. Then you've got to start making dramatic steering motions, and that can begin the oscillations that lead to a broach or a capsize. So I particularly picked the Scamp because of the short stem. And then the last feature is the pram bow. At speed, downwind, downwave on the Strait of Magellan and other places, when I got going too fast, that would act as it would kick up such a bow wake that would act as sort of a mushy brake. It would slow me down. The short stem meant that the boat didn't purl or root to one direction or another. It was brilliant. I'm so glad I picked that. I know some people laugh at the Scamp. It's a stubby little thing. I'm kind of a boat snob. Why? Some people have said, hey, you're a former racing sailor. Why would you sail a boat like that? I said, because it's smart. Okay, it's able to be rowed. Sorry about that long tirade there, but I picked the boat over all others, even my own design, for that reason. It's able to be rowed or paddled with a stand-up paddleboard paddle. It's easy to anchor and sleep aboard. I can pull it up onto dry land. It has numerous sail configurations. The way I configured it, I can sail with jib and jigger, Genoa and mizzen, reefed mizzen, staysail, double reefed main, mizzen, Genoa only, storm trysail. I carried those sails with me. It has unstayed masts. The running shrouds are not meant to hold the mast up. And the reason the running shrouds are there, as depicted in this drawing, the reason these running shrouds are here is to induce headstay tension. But we all know that downwind, downwave, and I predominantly sailed a reaching course down the Strait of Magellan and then across the Strait of Magellan and Cape Froward with the wind behind me, and then all points of sail after that, is when the boom, when you're boomed out, when a boom, and there's no vang on this boat, okay, when the boom is out, it can hit the shroud and start to ride up the shroud. That increases the fullness of the main. All bets are off, okay? That can lead to the same situation where the oscillations start because you're overpowered, the sail's gotten larger. So I can simply reach down, pop the running shroud off the winch. They each would snap to the mast with a bungee cord, and I can sail in heavy winds with the hollow bird's mouth spar that I built. Very strong. Okay, let me go back to here. Easy to repair in field. I carried a small repair kit. I built the boat. I knew exactly how it went together. I knew exactly how my klepper went together. I could repair that with leather shoelaces, a little bit of this, a little of that. The Scamp, I carried a small repair kit. The negatives on the Scamp, just like as I did on the klepper. It was expensive to ship to and from Patagonia. I can't say it wasn't. It cost a lot to do that, but if I juxtapose that against sailing a 40-foot yacht there, well, it was a bargain by any means. It is difficult to haul onto land, but quite doable as I set it up. I had inflatable rollers. I had what we call a ratchet or a come along, and I had a block and tackle set up. So I could actually winch the boat up on land, as you'll see, and then I'd have it back anchored, then I could pull it back off land very easily. Logistics pre and post trip were challenging. The logistics of shipping a 16-foot by 6-foot by 5-foot heavy wooden box to Chile and to Patagonia and back, and passing customs and all that. It was really a challenge. It is difficult to row a Scamp in wind. It's not an ideal rowing boat. From a sailing perspective, everybody can chuckle, but I give it a 9. I know it's 10 feet, 10 inches on the waterline. It's 11 feet, 11 inches long. It's not the fastest boat in the world, but it's definitely not the slowest. It's got sneaky speed. And I'm a bit of a snob about what I sail, and I believe the boat is a great little sailor, particularly how I rigged it. It is difficult to row in wind, as most boats are, but this one, I give it about a 7 or a 6 for rowing, but it's very doable. And when are you going to row? You're probably going to row when there's no wind. I needed a dinghy. And so I carried a dinghy, as you'll see. On board, it was an inflatable Innova Twist, little 16-pound thing. It was more challenging to right than my sailing canoe, but certainly manageable. It was challenging to anchor out in extreme conditions, I have to admit. It was a trick, but that's not this boat. Any boat in Tierra del Fuego has a real problem anchoring out in extreme conditions. I had set it up with 250-foot shorelines. I had 4 of those. I carried 4 anchors. So just like I did with my klepper, I got to know the Scamp inside and out. I capsized it. I climbed over it upside down, right side up, head in the cockpit upside down. Every way you could think of. I tested the prototype. and learned everything I could about it. And then I built my own. So I probably won't do this. I wasn't quite sure how to embed this, but maybe if you're interested, go on YouTube and look up Scamp capsize. And if you do that, I don't want this to go on too long. Watch the clock and you'll see that when the boat capsizes, it's back up in 15 seconds. I'm back aboard and sailing away without bailing in about 50 seconds. So I built my own boat. I built it on a rotating spit of sorts. I could rotate the boat 360 degrees to work on it. I made a false bow and a false transom, and I could put it on its side and fill it. This photograph, you can see as I'm building, the 35 gallon per minute pump is in here. That's where the 10 gallon per minute pump is. Here are the transom vents, and you can't see the bailers, but the bailers are in the cockpit. I also designed and built a footwell, and now the Scamp design comes with footwell on these configurations. Right here, you can see one of the two bailers that I put in there. This offered an aft lazarette. It reduced the cockpit size, but gave me more storage and more buoyancy. I could store everything underneath here. Each of these compartments has its own hatch, and everything was packed in dry bags. I also lined the garboard plank in Kevlar, and I also wrapped the stem in a matrix of Kevlar and carbon fiber. And this is smart. Some people have said, well, why did you put the Kevlar on the inside? And it's because Kevlar never belongs on the outside of a hull, period. The reason the Kevlar is on the inside and not the outside is this. When you abrade Kevlar, it fuzzes up. Kevlar is good against puncture, but it's very weak against rubbing or scraping. So if you have Kevlar on the outside of a hull and you scrape it, it's going to fuzz up and get rough, and it's not very strong. It'll abrade through. But if you try to puncture from the outside, you can puncture through the fiberglass on the bottom of the boat and the plywood, but it's going to stop at the Kevlar. And I came back with a small hole in the outside of my boat, but no hole through the Kevlar. So respectfully to boat builders, this is just my take. I may be wrong, but this is how I did it. And I believe Kevlar is good on the inside, not the outside. Here's a picture of the cuddy cabin. You might look at the helmet and laugh, but the helmet is a very important element when I was for where I sailed and sailing solo. The goggles for hail and snow and bad conditions. But if you think about for a moment, I'm in a little boat by myself, 300 miles from the nearest human. There is no call the Coast Guard or a boat passing by for help. When I went to shore, I had to go to shore in very treacherous, slippery, wave-breaking conditions. If I slipped and fell and had a concussion, game over. And so the way that I would go to shore is I would sometimes wear a helmet if things were rough, if I had to go through surf, and that's why that's there. You can see the door that I have for the inflatable cuddy cabin. I put a window in here because I could also, in the event that I got super cold, extremely cold, I could take the inflation system out and crawl in there and actually sit side to side, snap the door down, reach up, reach out, snap it closed, and be able to look out to see how my boat was maneuvering at anchor. This thwart is a floating thwart. My main sheet block is not fixed. I slip this in, the main sheet comes down and locates this exactly where it should be. I pull it forward, flip it over, and then there's a cushion for this side. So it's a dual purpose rowing thwart and main sheet. This is all the equipment I carried on the trip. I did leave the extension ladder behind, but everything is here. I packed all my dry food into BPA-free plastic bags or bottles. This is the rig. All of this gear went in this boat, plus 90 days of food. The boat is set up with a wood stove, but before I talk about that, these hiking cushions are on hiking platforms that I built. You can unvelcro these and they flop down and they become backrests. This is the tiller I built with an under hiking stick. And this wood stove actually collapses into a small, I guess you can't see the box there, a small dry box. It's a collapsible hearth. The legs come off, the water jacket comes off. And this is only used in what I call the daily use tent. Here are some important items. Here's a picture of the 4 12-volt batteries in parallel that I had under the floor ahead of the water ballast. I had 3 hard knives mounted on the boat on lanyards so I could cut any line at any time. I also had, oh, somebody's calling me, sorry. I also had a titanium hatchet on a lanyard so I could actually, from the water, from the boat, I could simply cut anything that I needed to cut at any time. Here are the 4 anchors that I carried. I carried a Bruce type, I carried a folding Herreshoff and 2 North Hills, and about 1,000 feet of anchor road and shoreline tie-off lines. Here's a picture of the line drawing of the design that John did for the boat. I changed it a little bit. There is no sprit. You know, I ended up going with a floating gaff. Float jaws and a floating boom on jaws, and the same thing for the mizzen. Here's a picture of the cockpit. You can see the bailers here. I often would sail without the cushions in the bottom, but you can see where they Velcro on, and they also each hard snapped into the boat. Hiking straps, because I sailed the boat flat. So sorry, I don't mean to be going so fast, but I don't want to bore anyone here. So I also believe that the physical connection, I'm sorry, there's a phone call coming through. The physical connection to any boat is very important. So I took a fair amount of time making this tiller feel good and look good, because this is how I'm connected to my boat. And so it looks a little bit gaudy and elaborate. I kind of made it look like a Japanese katana in honor of Japan. But this is a very functional, very comfortable walnut tiller that was actually, the blank was made by 3 of my friends who were in, our friends, John and I, who were in Scamp camp together. So this is John Welsford in Patagonia with me. The boat is being packed. It's being loaded in this picture, dropped into the Strait of Magellan at a very magical place, into this little estuary. Whoops. So here are the 2 tents. This is the high wind tent that I used on the trip. And it could be used in, here it is in half mode. It could be snapped down and used in full mode. I could unsnap it back here and use it in half mode this way, drape down into my lap. If I was at anchor and really in very, very challenging conditions, I might not want to be in the tent fully. I can also blow through this tent very quickly. With one hand, I can disengage it and get out of it if something happened and the boat happened to go upside down, because when I was at anchor, I would deflate the cuddy cabin and would sit inside of here with my feet back there, and I would sleep in this position here. Here you can see the twin headsails, lazy jacks. Here's the general use tent. This is a 3-pole, almost stand up in the footwell tent. And this is where the chimney comes through for the wood stove. All the hardware on the boat has double backing. For example, here's the peak and the main halyard for the main, backed up by 2 horn cleats. I never trust cam cleats alone. Every cam cleat is backed up, except for these 2. They're for something else, or backed up by horn cleats. So I would take these halyards through here, slam down the clutch, and then make them off to the horn cleat. You don't want to lose your rig in big winds. This is a photo after I came back and was refurbishing the boat, giving it some paint. You can see that this is a door above a hatch. A hatch fits in here, a watertight hatch, and then this door comes down. It's carpeted, and my 2 anchors, usable anchors, are stowed in there. Aft anchor road goes through this hawse pipe, and on the starboard side is the forward anchor. Here you can see the vents. You can see the pump out for the 35 gallon per minute electric and the 10 gallon per minute hand pump. Here's a quick picture of the retrieve setup. I would send a sail out with its furler and then retrieve it back. And this is the retrieve out, in and out, because I never wanted to go on the foredeck. But I went on the foredeck many times. One night I went on the foredeck 14 times. In dire circumstance, I had to change anchor 14 times from up here, because these are captive chalks and my anchoring system is here. I let out full road. I was captured in this little horseshoe canyon and really in a tough spot, like really tough spot. So I had to attach another 100 feet of anchor line to this one. I had to tie it on so the knot was outside of the chalk. So whenever I'd have to pull up anchor, I'd have to go forward, reach down, grab the anchor, pull it back. That was a night to remember. So here's my ground tackle again. These items, very important. I wore a very expensive dry suit that was a gift from my friend Josh Colvin of Small Craft Advisor. He was very kind to supply this with me, and it's an Ocean Rodeo Ignite. It actually saved my life. You can wear it in standby mode. It's very comfortable. It's lined with a reflective lining. So I'm almost at the end of my program, so hang on. I believe very firmly in teaching people, young people in particular, and inspiring them, because people inspired me. John Welsford and I did this together in our time in Chile before my trip. And as you heard from the phone call, I did it. We prepared lesson plans and we interacted with school groups. And I think this lesson is the microforce of Tierra del Fuego. And another one was defining the wind. And the kids love this. They followed my trip through MapShare. Every 10 minutes, many kids, hundreds of them, were following us. And I have nothing but respect and thanks to my friend John for wholeheartedly embracing this and taking our time to do this. I know that there are kids out there whose lives were changed. So before I left, I received the blessing of the Armada. They inspected my boat. There are 100 points you have to hit in order to go to receive the Zarpe. My boat hit all of them. And these two photographs are quite interesting because I stayed in this estuary for a week and families had heard about me. There were no other boats like this, or there were no yachts in Punta Arenas, and families would come down and some of them would pray. They would say I was crazy. And so I had lots of kids come on board and their parents would take photographs. It was lovely. So this is day one of my trip. It just got more interesting from here. This is a photo taken by a news photographer who sent it to me later. So I don't know if you can hear this or not, the audio, but I launched my boat into the Strait of Magellan. I'll make this very quick. And something happened. I had full permission from the Armada. They loved everything I was doing. They offered to escort me across Cabo Forward. I told them no, I was on my own. I was on their radar. I had everything set. And the day before I was going to leave, an Armada officer showed up in a rather bad mood, wearing a firearm that he kept tapping and said, "You cannot go. You must come to headquarters tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. And I was anchored out in the Strait of Magellan. I'd been living on my boat for almost 2 weeks, acclimatizing and eating my diet. And so it was 7 miles into the Armada, and I made a mistake. I left the boat anchored out. And normally when I would go out to the main road, somebody would just pick me up. If I was walking, a car would come by and they would just stop and pick me up, and I'd be in Punta Arenas 7 miles in minutes. That day, nobody picked me up. And when I got to Armada headquarters, by the time I got there, the wind had increased from, 10 knots to over 40. And the Armada said, "We don't know who that is. We don't know who came to see you. You're free to go." And I ran the 7 miles back. And I don't know if you can hear this, but this is the day I was going to leave. And this is what happened.
So here I am. Blown off anchor here.
I was blown off anchor.
Going to
Now, this is 3 days later.
with the Armada. I was getting no responses. And the Willy Wall came up.
So this wind came up out of the west and blew my boat off anchor.
So
I brought it down the beach. I had to don my dry suit and swim an anchor out to get it off the shore.
managed to get my dry suit on, swam an anchor out. And
now I'm not a young man anymore, but I'm in pretty good shape. But I had to swim an anchor out into the Strait of Magellan in very extreme circumstances. My boat was on its side, being pounded in the waves, full of sand. I I was a fool. I left some of the hatches open. I thought I was going to be gone for 30 minutes or 40 minutes. So this is how we learn. Let me go back to, oops, I'll go back to this video and I'll advance it.
So here she is on the beach.
There's my dinghy.
Dinghy. The air rollers, Chuck Meinharber.
The air rollers I used to get it off the beach. So there was some damage. The rudder was damaged.
Got the rudder off, the rudder was jammed up.
The bottom had some damage. So I replaced the gasket, repainted the boat,
Bottom of the boat.
and spent the next 8 days. Some of my food was ruined. I had to buy new stores, and I lived in that little yellow hut for 8 days. And finally, I got so fed up, I just said, I got to get out of here. And so this is the day that I departed. It wasn't optimal, but it was a west wind blowing from here to there. And so I reached off, fully reefed in these conditions. So, sorry, this is at low tide. So you can see the tide mark here. When the tide came up, I was able to winch off using my winch. So one of the port side winch, I was able to winch the boat off the rollers. I would move, I had 5 rollers, roller, and roll the boat into the ocean. Now, I'm going to stop here and I'll move on to the next slide, but the gray bag right here is my sea anchor, which is always rigged, and there's a chafe guard, so that sea anchor is always ready to deploy. This is how I charted. I charted all my course with a big fat red line because there was no need to do compass headings, but I did do compass headings into potential anchorages with reciprocal or look back courses. Not one of those anchorages worked out for the entire trip because of the advent of the outgrowth of kelp. The Chilean Hydrographic Office said in the last 20 years, kelp growth had increased in Tierra del Fuego by about 60%. You can see kelp here, lots of wildlife along the way. And I face willywaws. Willywaws are incredibly strong winds that come up. They last for anywhere from, I don't know, 30 seconds to a minute. And this is the teller of the tale in Tierra del Fuego. There's the kelp that I fought all the time. That really was what I didn't bargain on, was the constant kelp. You can't anchor in it, you can't swim in it, you can't sail in it, you can't steer in it, you can't row in it. And it was, all the anchorages were clogged up. Here's sailing after Cape Froward, leaving Bahia Zigzag. This is just a kind of a nice shot. Some of my sailing shots look like they're rather benign because I was careful. I tried to sail in good conditions whenever I could. I filmed the entire trip. You can see GoPro camera on the boat there. I had 5 cameras on board and shot about 80 hours of film. Here's my inflatable dinghy. There it is. That's when I'd anchor out. That's how I got to shore. Just some shots of, so this shot is actually quite important. When I would go ashore, I would attach myself to the boat with a 75-foot polypropylene line. And then this inflatable buoy would be attached to my life jacket. Now, my life jacket system is one I've used for years. I wear a flat life jacket here, and then I wear a vest over it. And the vest contains whatever I need, for my safety. My DeLorme, InReach DeLorme, knife, a water bottle on my back, small food supply, carabiner right here is where I clip on to this. So no matter what, if I get separated from my boat, even though I've got a life jacket on, I've got this inflatable buoy attached to me. And then I would sometimes wear a helmet and I'd crawl in through the surf and I would be attached to my boat and ready to go. And this knife that's hanging here is a dedicated kelp knife. Every time I would pull up anchor, I'd cut easily 100 pounds of kelp off my boat, off the anchor. You can see a knife mounted here. My anchors are kept there, and there's my lovely bucket. So I'll move on here. I'll just skip this slide. Lots of wildlife. I'm at the end of my program here. I do want to play this slide. This is the beginning of, this is an important one to me because this was actually what some people say, oh, I didn't sleep for a day. I literally had not slept for 3 days. I had these blackout moments of, 30 seconds or a minute, but I make a number of mistakes in this video, and you can just see what the real life, the unglamorous life of the solar sailor is like. You can just see the snow starting. It's pretty cold. Maybe you can't see it very clearly, but it's just starting to snow. And I'm coming into another potential anchorage, and you can see kelp over here. And I make a number of mistakes in this clip because I'm exhausted. And so I'm sailing into a little canyon. And if you look at the mizzen, it's actually windier than it seems. And it's very cold. And so this little piece of hardware right here is very clever. I cross-sheeted, and this is a triple cleat I can snub. It's a fair lead, and I can use this as a quick jam cleat, and it's also a figure 8 cleat, one on each side of the boat. So my anchoring system, it looks disorganized, but actually my anchor rod has already been used earlier that day. I tried to anchor. My anchor comes up over the side of the boat, goes into a canvas bag, and then I stow it down below through the hawse pipe at the end of each day. So now I'm about to anchor and start making mistakes. So this was a 6-hour ordeal, actually. I ended up in a bit of a fight getting out of this place and had to sail on for another 12 hours. So that's a North Hill, an anchor that I really like. So here's my first mistake. I haven't released the anchor rod from an on-deck shackle. And this is causing a problem because my hands are numb. I don't have any feeling in them. So finally I get the anchor out, and now I've made another mistake. The anchor retrieve line hasn't been deployed, it's jammed up, so the anchor won't play out over the bow. So this vest that I wear means that if I'm in the water and I need to get back in the boat, one thing I see that people wear these days are these kayaking vests with big pockets on the front. Good luck trying to climb in over the gunnel of a boat with all this stuff that people carry in their vests. So I can unzip this vest, throw it in the boat, and I'm still wearing my life jacket. I really recommend this kind of a setup as opposed to life jackets with sewn in front pockets. So please bear with me. This will only last for another few seconds. So I'm in a bit of a fight. My anchor's not down yet. It's jammed up at the bow. So out comes the knife. And I cut the retrieve line. Bit confused as to where my knife goes. Anyway, I'll move on. That's what it looks like. That's reality. And that's why I mentioned just not minding. I don't mind the hardship because once I get the tent up and I get some hot food cooked, I'm in heaven. It's just, I'm willing to spend some time in conditions like this with numb hands and, being dead tired. If you look at my hand, it's in pretty bad shape. And that's the teller of the tale in both of my trips was how my hands ended up taking a hit. I still haven't totally perfected that. So I'll move on here to the next slide if I can. So this is dipping out into the Southern Ocean. This is my boat to this day. It sails lovely. I often tow my dinghy behind. So if I was to do the voyage in Tierra del Fuego again, I would choose the Scamp. I've given this serious thought. A couple of days ago, I said I would choose the Klepper, but I would definitely choose the Scamp, given my age and given the comfort that it offered. And I want to give a thank you to some very special people here. The fuzzy Kiwi on the left is my dear friend John Welsford. Sophie Ortiz, Jorge Ortiz, her father. Sophie was instrumental. We flew her down to Punta Arenas and she really helped with translating with customs. And more importantly than anybody else, I want to thank these two people. The man on the left is John Cano Arias, and the man on the right is Pato Cano Arias. And they're two Chileans. They're fishermen. Pato is no longer with us. Pato was killed a couple of years ago. But the end of my voyage is more remarkable than the actual voyage. And I owe everything to these two dear friends. And Pato, and I did something remarkable. I don't want to be dramatic, but these are two very, very special people. So there's my boat. That's my story. And I want to say thank you to everyone. That's the end of my program.
Well, thank you very much, Howard. You want to take it off screen share?
Sure.
Wow. Yes, well, it does remind me so much of windy anchorages in Scotland, but as I say, even more so. And that sense of, yes, exactly that, arriving somewhere and it being miserable and getting the cover up and yes, and that sort of transforms it, other than if it's a bumpy anchorage overnight as well. But yes, you just have not to mind, as you say, because there is something about being in the wild in a little boat. So yes, thank you very much for that. You did actually you sort of ended the story without the end, but I think you did actually get rolled over.
Well, let me just address that quickly because it's,
didn't you?
Yeah.
And then rest.
let me just take a moment. I won't go in. I've gone on too long. I apologize to everyone for going on too long. I hope you were able to bear. But what happened in the end was my boat was capsized by what's called a tromba marina. It was blown completely inverted, and then I righted it. It was blown again by another of these trombas. The Chilean Armada had shut down all boat traffic in Tierra del Fuego. The trombas that they clocked were at 107 knots. The third time I was blown off my boat, I had to go back and a week later rescue my boat with John and Pato Cano, and it's one heck of a story. It makes my trip look like chump change. It was a real adventure.
Oh, well, thank you very much. There are no one has asked any questions. I don't know if anyone wants to raise a hand and ask some questions. I think everyone's just stunned into silence by what you did. So yes, I was interested in the wood stove. I remember when you were sharing that, and I was thinking of putting one up in my tent because of that thing about the cold, damp night and being able to, but I decided that it would just be too dangerous. I just thought wood stoves are dangerous things anyway. And I thought, well, if the boat ends up being knocked over and you've got this red hot thing, I could just sort of see that being a big problem. So I didn't actually go for that in the end. And I think you actually left it behind as well. I think
That's correct. I left it behind for another week's supply of food, but that stove is on a lanyard. It's on, it can be picked up. I would never use it in anything but calm conditions. And I can toss it overboard and retrieve it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, right. There are some questions now. This is what always happens. You see, I always have to ask some questions, then everyone else thinks some. How much does the Scamp? Oh, good grief! How much does the Scamp weigh, empty and loaded?
I don't know what my boat weighed loaded, actually. I can only guess. I don't really know in the end. I knew before I had to replace my food stores because I ended up having to buy some new food after the event on the beach. But the normal Scamp weighs, the lug rig Scamp weighs about 425 or 35 pounds. my boat probably came in closer to 480 or 490. And maybe with total payload, I was at about 750 or 800. I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, that with the ballast tank full, presumably.
With the ballast tank full, the ballast tank is 175 pounds, plus my batteries were 100. So that was 75 right in the middle in the right spot.
Yeah, yeah, yes. Someone's asking, well, what are the spec of your modifications and equipment can be found? I don't know, you have a website, don't you? I've certainly seen it.
Well, I've never published anything about the specs. Maybe on the, is someone looking specifically for all of the modifications aside from the drawing?
Richard Hoyland is saying, where can the spec of your modifications and equipment be found? I don't know, you were sharing it on Facebook, I think, weren't you? Was in the run-up.
Well, it was published.
I was following you before you actually did the trip.
Yeah, Roger, to the viewer, it was published in a two-part article in Small Craft Advisor magazine. So I don't have that magazine here, but I did a very extensive description of the boat, the food. John wrote a sidebar. So I could try to get that and post it on the DCA Facebook page if somebody wants. I can request it. I don't have a copy of that with me here in Japan, but I'd be happy.
They'd probably let us republish it in the bulletin, actually. We are friends with Small Craft Advisor. We sometimes let them publish our thing.
Yeah, I bet Josh would be happy to want to maybe make that request.
Yeah, that'd be the thing too. So what was your food for 90 days? It would be sort of,
the food that
sort of rations type stuff.
Yeah, the food that I prepared was plant-based to start with, because I didn't have any refrigeration, and so all of that was easily prepared. I used a lot of nuts, and very high calorie diet. I'll put it that way, because I was going to consume a lot of calories. In the end, it ended up being fresh onions, fresh limes, carrots, cabbage, oranges, whatever I could buy in Chile, because I made a mistake. I mean, like I said, I'm nothing special. That day I should have battened down all the hatches, but my boat was on its side in the surf, full of sand and breaking waves, and a lot of my food stores were open. I was living on the boat. I was foolish, and so I had to replace everything. So I took a lot of yogurt, a lot of Chilean cheese, canned salmon, canned sardines, food that what I try to do is I try to eat the diet I normally eat. And so there's not a big transition. I don't use freeze-dried food at all, ever. So my diet ended up being a lot of fresh food, which ended up being much heavier than my original stores.
Yeah. Someone's asking if it would be possible to scale up the Scamp, make it more livable. I'm going to say no, you can't, because boats are designed at a certain size, and just making the bigger doesn't really work. So I'm going to dive in and say that. John Welsford actually does design the longer. He's produced a number of boats that are rather like elongated Scamps. So rather than getting wider, they just get longer. Because of course, if they get any wider, you can't row them. John's a very interesting designer, actually.
Roger, your take is correct in my view. And John has designed the Scamp, and then he's designed other boats that are not the Scamp. There's no reason to make the long steps design. For example, some people go, oh, it's a longer Scamp. It's totally different boat, completely different concept. It looks kind of the same because the cabin looks a little the same, but I built, co-built the second one of those, part of it, and it's a different boat completely. There's no reason to switch the Scamp.
Yeah,
he has.
It's the same sort of idea, but that's right. It's a very different boat, and it's very definitely a boat to be rowed and sailed. Whereas the Scamp, as you say, is really a little sailing boat. It's not really a rowing boat, so it can be rowed. Yeah. So no, but John designs a boat for a particular purpose, and I think often with boats, it's best to, well, you can talk to the designer and say, can I make this a bit bigger? And maybe the designer says, yes, you can, but it's always a good idea to, Yeah, to talk to the designer rather than just say, oh, it'll be better a bit bigger. Because often boats aren't better a bit bigger.
Well, John and I have known each other for a while, and the reason I got involved in building scamps with students, John and I were at the first group build, and I ran some of my ideas by him, and we think very much the same. And so nothing was foreign to him. He didn't see the boat until it came out of the box in Chile. He had not seen it. There were many modifications I made without his knowledge. It's a good boat, period, as with the lug rig. So my Scamp, I can simply take the rig out of it and drop a lug rig in, and it'll be the same, except it'll have a bowsprit that I wouldn't use.
Yes, I think we ought to. I'm going to one that Jeffrey Rogers has asked the question. I think I'll ask you that one, and then we probably should wrap it up, because particularly here in France, it's getting very late. Yeah. So he says, do you ballast with fresh water and replace with salt? I should suspect not. I think you probably ballast with salt water in the ballast tank, and yeah.
I did on that trip. I did both.
Okay.
I started with salt.
I know.
So what I do know about Tierra del Fuego, because I've been there, is when I left on the Scamp trip, the Navy, the Armada asked me, you mean that's all the water you're going to carry? I had about 2 liters of water on board. I said, yes, because I know there's water everywhere. And I had a pumping system. So in my boat, in the ballast tank, I had rectangular Nalgene bottles that fit in there, and I had a grease pencil.
Oh.
And so what I did is I started off with salt water in those, and then I filled the potential space around them, topped it off with salt water. When I got south near Isla Aguirre, I rinsed all of those. I have a little video of me sitting in a stream rinsing all of those. Then I filled all of them with fresh water, put them back in the ballast tank, and then filled the potential space with salt water. So in the event that when I hit the Southern Ocean, if all would have gone bad and I would have been driven out into the Southern Ocean and had to make landfall hundreds of miles away, either Staten Island or the Falklands or somewhere, I would have adequate water. I could take one of those out, I could use it, mark it with the grease pencil, fill it with salt water, put it back in, and then know which were salt and which were fresh. So I could have potentially carried about 160 gallons of fresh water.
Mm-hmm. And so you would have been in the open, because it's an open boat, crossing the Southern Ocean to get to South Georgia or the Falklands. That you felt that was survivable.
But the tent that I designed can be operated in several modes. It can be full tent mode. It can be half the 4.5 length of the cockpit, or I can unsnap the back and just the front, maybe a half or so would be attached to the cabin top, drape down and snap down on the footwell, so I could sit in the cuddy while sailing, because the boat can be self-steered. I've got to set up a system. And then I could have my feet in the footwell. I could sleep sort of sitting up under a tent while I'm sailing, but I'd be free to get out of it. They wouldn't be fully attached.
Gosh, so that was it. Yeah, that was the plan.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Down the seas of the Southern Ocean.
Right. And, would that have ever happened? No, because I'm very conservative, but I also believe in survival. And so
it's planning for every eventuality. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Yes, quite right. Okay, well, thank you very much. That was the last question. So yes, thank you, Howard. That was extraordinary.
Well, thank everyone for putting up with all my slides. I hope it was meaningful. Sail safe.
Most of us are still here. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all. It's been an honor. I'm really glad I did this.